What's going on, everybody? James Haycock here. I'm back to review episode 6 of season 2 of the Orville, an episode titled A Happy Refrain. And I can't properly express just how much I needed this episode tonight. Seth MacFarlane really is just making the magic happen with this show, where every episode is exploring new terrain in surprising ways. But more importantly, with tonight's story, the Orville managed to put its best foot forward with a story that nearly brought me to tears on precisely the same evening that Star Trek Discovery managed to vomit all over itself. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but I've been following season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, and tonight's episode, Point of Light, is going to go down as possibly the worst episode of Star Trek that I've ever seen, or at least that I can remember. It was so overly intense and overwrought that it ended up just backfiring in every way and just feeling ridiculous. But I'll be getting to that in my next video, either later tonight or tomorrow. Right now, I want to focus on the Orville because this episode either had me smiling ear to ear or just straight up cracking up from start to finish. For anyone who decided prematurely to write off the show as a Star Trek spoof, I think one of the best ways to counter that misconception would be with this episode, one that managed to succeed as a genuine romantic comedy with the added bonus of a loving homage to Hollywood musicals. Also, this episode featured a surprise guest star, so if you haven't watched it yet, do so now because I will be going into spoilers. So I've been waiting for an episode focused on Isaac all season, and tonight's episode was just the absolute motherload, with Isaac and Dr. Finn initially simply going out on a date, which provided abundant opportunities for comic relief. But what I didn't expect was that Seth MacFarlane and his team would successfully manage to craft a legitimately moving love story, one that was far more memorable than the majority of the interchangeable rom-coms that Hollywood churns out like a hot dog factory. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's break it down step by step. Unlike most episodes, this story featured no secondary plots, apart from a few gags about Malloy convincing Bortus to artificially give himself a mustache. Malloy's talking about how authoritative it makes him appear, and he's showering with all this praise like, with all that across the lip, what else does he have going on? And just seeing Kelly's bewilderment at that line just absolutely had me howling. But the romance between Dr. Finn and Isaac gets underway slowly but surely, with little friendly gestures like bringing her food or noticing when she's changed her hair, but her feelings for him really pick up some momentum after Isaac helps her son Ty prepare for a piano recital. She indulges in some good old-fashioned girl talk with Kelly over a glass of wine, and Kelly ultimately just tells her to go for it. On Isaac's end, he sees this as a new opportunity to study human behavior, and he agrees to go on a date. In one of the best scenes of the episode, we have this great scene where Isaac goes down to engineering for advice, and Dan cries out, "Sweet emotion." I mean, once again, I just was cracking up throughout this episode. But Lamar offers Isaac some dating advice in terms of attire and etiquette, and then the date is underway. They see a performance of Singing in the Rain by this symphony that's putting on a concert in the Shuttle Bay, and then they hit the simulator for dinner at Claire's favorite restaurant. And like many first dates, Isaac manages to make a lot of mistakes. He downloads all the available data on Claire ahead of time, including where she's from, her love of rain, etc. So there's no real mystery while they're engaging in small talk, but the night does end with a little smooch and the idea to try it again. So after some lessons about spontaneity from the crew, Isaac suddenly decides to show up at Claire's quarters at 3 a.m. with a cake and tells her that it's time for a date. It actually reminded me a little bit of that scene in Billy Madison when Adam Sandler shows up at Veronica Vaughn's home. It's like, we're going to go on a date. In any case, the gesture backfires, so Isaac returns to Lamar for advice, who's on a bowling date down in the simulator, and Isaac plays back precisely what Claire said. So Lamar gets a few ideas, and Isaac invites Claire to another date in the simulator, and this time, he gets everything right. He erases all the available data about her so they can get to know each other through small talk, but we also finally get a chance to see actor Mark Jackson in the flesh. This is the form that Isaac takes on in order to be able to kiss. However, Finn tells him she's in the mood for a little bit more, and they get down to it. The evening is followed by a little more girl talk between Kelly and Tala and Finn, and they all seem a little jealous of Isaac's sexual prowess. But things get a little more serious when Finn admits that she is actually falling in love. The flip side is that Isaac's already ready to move on now that he's gathered all the available data on coupling, and once again he seeks Lamar's advice, and Lamar explains the old trick of basically acting like a piece of shit so you convince the other person to break up with you. And the only thing that prevents us from kind of turning against Isaac at this point is that we get one of the funniest moments all season where Isaac surprises Claire in her home and he's wearing dirty whitey tighties and a wife beater. He's drinking beer and demanding his dinner. She pretty much breaks up with him on the spot. However, she sees through the ruse what he is doing and she's genuinely hurt. And in the days that follow, we see that everyone on the bridge is pretty unimpressed with Isaac's conduct as well. But then we got a treat that I never saw coming. Norm Macdonald himself shows up because Yaphet enters the simulator to try to cheer Finn over a drink. So finally, Norm gets to show up in the flesh. And he's one of those actors who's always cracked me up ever since I first saw him in Billy Madison. That's the second time I've brought up Billy Madison in this review, so if you haven't seen Billy Madison, go see it. It's one of the funniest movies of the 90s. But I'm thrilled that they finally found a way to get Norm Macdonald himself on the show, not just his voice. But back on the bridge, no one's more surprised than Isaac when he makes a mistake in his calculations, something that basically just doesn't happen. But as it turns out, his attempts to remove Claire from his programming is contradicting other programs, and with a little help from Ed, it was almost like a Jean-Luc Picard moment, Isaac finally realizes that he's actually better with Claire than without her. And Isaac's research about human behavior is about to go into unexpected territory because he's going to have to learn how to make an apology. And he does so in the most dramatic fashion possible by secretly inviting Claire to the bridge in front of everybody. And not only saying that he wants a long-term relationship, but he makes it rain while blasting Gene Kelly's performance of Singing in the Rain, the Stanley Donen film from the early 50s. Even if you don't like musicals, Singing in the Rain is an absolute blast. But I had waves of chills going down my back, and I usually only have that experience while watching great movies, and I realized I was witnessing a scene that will most likely go down as a true creative high for Seth MacFarlane on this show. We all know about his love and adoration of classic musicals, and he's included a lot of references in the past, but I felt like this was the first time where he really brought in his affection for old movies in a way that legitimately enhanced the emotions of a scene, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I almost started crying. At any rate, next week there's no episode of The Orville, so we're all going to be stuck watching Star Trek Discovery with no way to wash the taste out of our mouth afterwards. But I imagine if anybody from the cast and crew of Star Trek Discovery sat down and saw tonight's episode of The Orville, they most likely were shaking their heads in absolute disbelief and envy. But I think that's all I have for now. But also, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I know this shirt looks a little weird. It's kind of an obscure comic book reference to Madrox the Multiple Man. And this costume's gone through a lot of changes over the years, but in the 21st century, during a giant arc written by Peter David, this was more of his established look. But if you're a comic book fan, you probably noticed it right from the outset. Also, I looked hard for any news related to the show this week, but I couldn't really find anything over the last week or so. But what I keep looking for is some indication as to what Disney plans on doing with all the Fox shows once the merger is complete later this year. I have no idea if Disney's going to allow Fox to just remain like a brand within a brand in terms of having their own movies and shows that Disney owns but doesn't put the Disney logo on top of. But I can't imagine that they would shut down all the Fox channels. But the question of whether or not The Orville gets a season 3 is more complicated than just what is the performance of the show or how well liked is the show. Because we don't know yet at this point how the Disney Plus app is going to be affected by all these Fox channels, if they're going to merge, remain separate, or whatever. But who knows? This time next year, we might be watching The Orville on Disney Plus. Only time will tell. But I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up, so I hope you enjoyed this reaction and review. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk more about Madrox the Multiple Man or The Orville or Star Trek or whatever, you can find me on Twitter at Colbrex, and there's a link in the description below. But thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll be back at you in the very near future. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.